Hello, and welcome to the Borcherding Index, the world's most comprehensive, unnecessary, and overly complicated fantasy football rating system. Today I'm going to talk to you about what it is, how it works, and how you can use it to help your fantasy football team. Very simply, it's a rating system from 0 to 100, where 0 is the worst team of all time and 100 is the best team of all time. It is found by weighting 3 categories and combining them together. First category is your wins, very simply, how many games you win and average on a per game basis. Second category is your domination factor, which is something I came up with to measure how dominant your team is. Basically, it's how many teams would you have beaten each week based off of how many points you scored that week. And lastly, figure out the strength of score, which is something I came up with to figure out how impressive your wins are. If you win by a landslide because the other team was really bad, that's not really very impressive. But if you win a really close game where both of you scored a lot of points, then that is a much more impressive win. 40% of the total for your score is for wins, because I think it's the most important individual category. And then 30% for strength of score and 30% of domination factor. Because while they're both important, I actually think they're more important combined than wins by themselves. So how does it work? First, I put in whether a team wins or loses each week. 1 for a win, 0 for a loss, and I'll be using my team, the Binghamton Rumble Ponies, as an example. I then put in how many points I scored each week and how many points were scored against me each week. I then use that to figure out the domination factor for my team and all the other teams. I start by putting in how many points were scored, and then I rank them from highest to fewest. Highest gets 11 because I would have beaten 11 teams that week, all the way down to 0 because you beat nobody. I then put that in for each week and average it up per game. Same thing with strength of score, except for strength of score, I add together your points scored and the points scored against you. I then rank those combined. You'll notice that you and your opponent will have the exact same strength of score, so you get the exact same point values. 5 for the 2 teams that have the most in the combined for their game, and 0 for the 2 teams that have lowest. Add those up and find them on a per game basis. What you end up with is a rating from 0 to 100, as mentioned before. In general, I find that 0 to 40 are your pretty bad teams. In the 40s up to the high 50s are your average teams. 60s to 70s are your good going into great. 80 is great going into amazing. And 90 is an unstoppable juggernaut. You'll notice that my team is a 55.3. That makes my team pretty average to a little bit above average. And if you look at my data and everything else, you'll notice that makes sense. I have 3 wins out of the total of 5, putting me slightly above average. I average 115 per game. My league average is 114. And I have 106 per game against me. You'll notice that that number is in red because it's a little lower than what you would expect for average. So fewer points are scored against me, so some of my wins might be a little lucky. You'll also notice I have a volatility rating over here. This rating is helpful for figuring out how consistent a team is. Teams with a higher volatility are less consistent. Teams with a lower volatility tend to score more or less the same number of points each week. I'm 24.3. That's pretty average, maybe a little higher than normal. You'll notice that's because I have 1 week of 83, 1 week of 151, and the rest are 111, 118, 113, pretty consistent. It's also helpful to look at what your average is in the domination factor. You'll notice that mine is 6.2. Again, my team is about above average, so I average beating a little more than 6 teams per week. Well, in a 12-team league, that would make me about average. And strength of score, mine is 2.4, which is kind of right in the middle. 2.5 would be exactly finishing in the middle on your week per week basis, and I'm at 2.4. So you can see how you can use this to kind of help understand how your team is performing over the season. As the season goes on, I will add a last 4 ranking, which will rank just your last 4 games. This introduces some recency bias that can be helpful in figuring out which teams are hot and which teams are not. So How accurate is it, you may ask? Well, for the 3 seasons that I've used this in our main fantasy football league, which has 20 teams, it has predicted the winner 2 of the 3 years. The year that it did not predict the winner, the team that won was ranked 3rd. The team that played them in the championship was ranked 9th. However, they were number 1 in the last 4 ranking, and in fact had been number 1 in the last 4 ranking for about 5 or 6 weeks straight. So while they weren't good overall in the ranking because of how poorly they played at the beginning of the season, they did turn out to be very good and was predicted to be so by the ranking. So there are lots of ways you can use this. I hope you will find it useful, informative, interesting, and maybe a good way to tease your friends. Most importantly, I hope you all have a blessed day and good luck coming in second.